Shalom, Israel. This is going to be a history lesson again. As you saw from the title, we're going to be dealing with the Yoruba and their Israelite origins. Well, basically trying to clear up their origins. I'm going to postulate my theory on this subject. We know that they're Israelites according to the Bible because the Yoruba were dispersed via slave ships, and that's one of the signs throughout the four corners of the world. And that's one of the signs given in the Bible to identify the Israelites. So, and there's other signs that are identifiers in the Bible as well that also apply to the Yoruba. So we know that. But we're going to try to clear up their origin story. Some background on my interest in this subject, obviously, because there's a lot of, I probably have some Yoruba ancestry somewhere. I don't know directly from my research. My wife's family, I know they do because I can look at them and tell. It's just like blatantly obvious because especially on the women's side of the family, and with my wife. And I will admit, I do think I do find the Yoruba women to be some of the more attractive women for my personal taste. But that's just a side note. Um, Obviously, that's the case if I'm telling you my wife looks like one. But anyways, a lot of Yoruba slaves brought here in the Western Hemisphere, so it would be as slaves. So it would be good to know um, things dealing with their origin. Also, really with a lot of this research, I'm just putting the information out there because I've already gone to school. I might go back again for another master's and maybe teach community college sometime in the future as far as history goes. But uh, other than that, like I'm not going to be writing any books really or anything like that. So like this information that I'm presenting in the research, I actually hope that if any scholars come, I know this is YouTube, but still, I mean, even when I was in college, I watched YouTube. If any scholars come across this information and they're in a history, they're getting a degree in history or anthropology or whatever of our people, and take this information and y'all do something with it. Make a thesis out of it. Do a research paper. You publish something on it. I'm just putting the information out there. Like I said, I've always felt called to share knowledge of self with my people because growing up it was just like our people we lack knowledge of self and it used to bother me a lot growing up and so it's like now just I give the information away free of charge. All right. The objective of this lesson is in this lesson we will reconcile the two dominant origin stories for the Yoruba. And reason why we're reconciling is we're taking the story that the Fulani, the Sokoto Caliphate, had written down that Muhammad Bello, who was considered to be one of the wisest men in West Africa at his time, but amongst other things, I'm not getting into the history details of that because I know some people might feel other ways not getting into that. But anyways, he wrote, uh, he kept, he brought out the records on it and made it public what they had written down, which was good because you need to write stuff down. It would have been excellent if the Yoruba would have written stuff down, but we didn't. Like our people, we don't tend to write stuff down. And we had a written language, but then we lost it. And we were living amongst the people who created the alphabet, the Phoenicians. But somehow we walked away. And now fast forward to 2018 and we don't have written languages. Those curses on the Israelites are real, bruh. Anyways, that's just a side note. Um, so we're gonna take his story, and then we're gonna take the tradition that the elders have, that's been passed down from the elders, and we're gonna reconcile them. And you're gonna see in this lesson, um, this is a theory, but in actuality, it's really a fact. The only part that's theory is what time did they leave Arabia. But other than that, like this is once I present the information to you, it'll be blatantly clear. Like what I'm saying is true. We just don't know the exact time. We have a roundabout time based off of the information we have, but we just don't have an exact time. All right. Anyways, so it will be shown that the Yoruba are a branch of Israelites who migrated out of southern Arabia during the latter era of the Himyarite kingdom, circa 550 AD. And that's why I put circa 550 AD because I had to split the baby. We don't It was sometime, more than likely, it's sometime between like 520 AD and sometime between like 570 AD. And you'll get more clarification on why that is as the lesson progresses. Okay. They were driven out by either Yusuf Asar when he began a genocide campaign on all Christians and idolaters, or Abraha. The Yoruba, under the leadership of Aduduwa, fled to Axum first, along with other Christian refugees. And when it says other Christian refugees, the Yoruba weren't, when they left, they weren't practicing Christianity. They were practicing idolatry, which is one of the reasons why they were taken into slavery in such high numbers, because that was one of the punishments that God laid out in the Torah for our disobedience if we practice idolatry. And the Yoruba, their origins go back to idolatry, as we're going to see in this lesson, and then and even still to this day, a lot of them, a lot of Yoruba are equally mixed in either practicing like voodoo or traditional Yoruba religion, Islam, and Christianity. They're mixed in all three, and a lot of, even here in the Western Hemisphere, a lot of the stuff, the voodoo, the Afro-Brazilian religions and stuff over there, down there and stuff, is very Yoruba infused. So they weren't Christians. They just went to Axum with Christian refugees, because Christians were also being persecuted as well at this time. We're going to get into this after we get past this objective, but also idolaters were as well, and they both went to Axum. Okay. Aduduwa fled to Axum first, along with other Christian refugees. From there, they went to the area between Ethiopia and Egypt near the Red Sea. This area at the time was a staging ground for a lot of Israelite migrations into sub-Saharan Africa, including the Akan and Igbo. I'm going to link the lessons I've done covering that to the end of this lesson, so you can watch those and get more information on that. But that area, basically between Cush, or between Meroe and Axum, between those two kingdoms, that was a large area. And especially after Axum sacked Meroe, because there was a lot of Israelites, a lot of Jews living in Meroe. I've covered this lots of times in my lessons. And when they sacked it, that's when you started getting the first trickle of Israelites migrating to West Africa from Meroe. And that was just one of the places that they started migrating from. You had others migrating from northern African places like Cyrene and things. I've covered this. But uh, that area became a large area of concentration of Israelites, and that's where they would go from there, going into sub-Saharan Africa. Where are we at here? This area, This area would later develop into the kingdom of Simeon. From here, Aduduwa and the Yoruba migrated to West Africa along with other Israelites. Lastly, we will cover the Yoruba diaspora. Per usual, historical sources and the Bible will be used. All right, before we jump into the key terms, I would strongly recommend you take notes, because there's a lot of slides and there's a lot of sources and it's going to be a lot of information. And we're going to be covering subjects that a lot of people don't have background knowledge on. So because we're dealing with Arabia and Yemen a lot specifically, and their history, and I know most of the people who listen to me are either Gentiles or Israelites or Hamite Africans, and your knowledge level on that might not be high. So I would recommend you take notes so you can go look into some of these things. Also, before we go forward, that you can look up that kingdom of Simeon on your own time that I mentioned in the previous slide. I've covered that too. I'll link a lesson to it at the end of this. That was the kingdom that the Israelites in Ethiopia developed, or the kingdom that the Jews eventually developed. But for a long time, it was just a large area with a large concentration or population of Israelites. And from there, that's where a lot of people migrated out into places. And I did a lesson covering a migration into Central Africa, where I show things with primary sources from the 1500s, 1600s, and maps from that time and all of that. I'll link it to the end of this lesson. Also, asking yourself, when would the Israelites have gone into Arabia? As you're going to see in this lesson, who we call the modern day Ethiopians today, they've ruled southern Arabia on and off. Originally, they were the ones who inhabited it there. Then when the Arabs came and supplanted them, they still ruled the area on and off from 2000 BC up until Muslim times on and off. Um, and in that process, there was Israelites who were living amongst Ethiopians during those times, and they came over during those times as well with the Ethiopians. But you also just had Israelites who went into Arabia. Example being, if you look at in Acts chapter 2, verse 11, it lets you know that there were Arabians at Pentecost. And remember, at Pentecost, that's where everybody was hearing the people speak in their own language. But everybody there at Pentecost that came to Jerusalem was Israelites in Acts chapter 2. So those were Israelites from the Arabian Peninsula. So it's letting you know there that there was Israelites living in the Arabian Peninsula. Then even Paul tells you in Galatians 1 and 17, neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, but I went into Arabia and returned again unto Damascus. And when he went down into Arabia, he was down there for a while. Reason why he felt comfortable going down there was because there was already Israelite populations living down there. Okay. So now let's deal with some key terms. We're going to have to deal with some stuff that deals with Islam. I would also recommend, even for the people on here, just because you're a Christian, doesn't mean you can't learn about other belief systems. I would strongly encourage all Christians and those who practice Judaism to look into studying Islam and its history. I also would encourage Muslims to look into studying and learning more about Christianity and so forth, because we're all Abrahamic religions, and there's differences, but at the end of the day, like if you've actually, because people haven't read on both sides, there's things that they walk around and there's things that you don't even know. And in reality, there's a lot of stuff, even with end times, that with Islam actually lines up with a lot of the stuff in the Bible. Not completely, but it does line up in a lot of ways. And it's going to make for an interesting end times when things happen, when Christ returns, because you're going to have the Muslims have their ideas about the end times, and a lot of it lines up with the Bible, but it's just tweaked in a little bit of ways. And then the same thing with the Christians and all their different views around the world. So it should just make for an interesting, second coming. But that's a digression. But we're going to dive into some stuff dealing with Islam too, to understand to get the clear picture of the origin of the Yoruba. So first, key term, Nimrod. And so Nimrod in the Bible was a son of Cush, so that made him an Ethiopian. And Nimrod is the one who founded Assyria, or Mesopotamia, which is in modern day Iraq, that first civilization on the planet Earth. Nimrod founded, who was a Cushite, okay, which makes him an Ethiopian. But in some Islamic traditions, because it doesn't really tell, Nimrod's not specifically named, they guess that it might be Nimrod per se. And in some traditions in Islam, the idea is that he descended from Canaan, not from Cush. The reason why we bring this up is because when we get into not the oral tradition, but when we get into the written tradition of the Yoruba's origins that was passed down that the Fulani kept, it says that they were Canaanites of the tribe of Nimrod. Okay. Well, we know that Nimrod wasn't a Canaanite. The Bible tells us he was a son of Cush. Excuse me. But you need to, the weather is changing, and it's been real windy in California the past couple of days, or Southern California, especially. So you might hear me blow my nose because it's allergies season coming in. But anyway, so you need to know that going forward for why would they say that they come from a branch of Canaanites named Nimrod. This is why we have to tell our own stories, and the Israelites we're the ones with the oracles. I always say this, but like God even said that, like, only Jacob have I known. When it comes to these oracles, if you need the answers, the understanding stuff in the Bible, and you can't figure it out yourself, you're going to have to go to an Israelite. That's the protocol throughout the whole Bible. And that doesn't mean just any Israelite. You're going to have to go to one who knows the scriptures. Most of us don't know the scriptures. If we knew the scriptures, I wouldn't be over here in America scattered in this daughter of Babylon. I'd be in my own land. But anyways, so you got to come and get the answers from us. Therefore, we know it couldn't be of the tribe of Nimrod, but they are. But the Canaanite thing, we'll get to that. That was spot on. Next, the next term, Canaanites. Canaan was also a son of Ham. You can find this in Genesis 10. And he had many children and produced the Canaanites, or the Phoenicians. And these are the same groups you find in the Bible, like the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, all of those people. Um, those are the Canaanites, okay? And so in the tradition that the Fulani kept in their written record, they said that the Yoruba were Canaanites. Well, the reason why they're going to come off as Canaanites from their written record and history and the record that the Arabs would have had, that's probably how they were defined, because the Yoruba weren't practicing worshiping Yahweh. They were practicing idolatry. Okay, and they had lived, and I always say this, when you study, anybody who's studied ancient history, you link the Israelites and the Canaanites together. Wherever you find Canaanites, you're going to find Israelites. Even the Bible tells you that, because they intermarried so heavily, and even today in Africa, the bloodline, according to the Bible, and according to the Torah, goes through the father. So you are what your father is. I've had this debate with people on here before. I'm not having it again. If you do, I will just cut and paste from the comment section where I destroyed somebody else on this subject. I don't know what your hang up is, what some people's hang up is with this. If you want to believe that the woman carries the woman is the one who passes on the seed, and you believe in some mother goddess stuff, all that, that's fine. You're entitled to your belief. But the Bible doesn't substantiate that. So just say you disagree with the Bible, but don't try to use the Bible to substantiate that claim, because it's not factual. The Bible is clear that the seed goes through the man. So you technically are what your father is, all right? Not mixed people. We're just going according to the Bible. That's not in there. You are what your father is. So that being said, there's been a lot of mixture, even up until today, amongst Canaanites and Israelites in Africa, different groups intermarrying each other. And then some people would be like, oh, well, then that means they're all Israelites. No, it goes by the signs, and it goes by your bloodline, your paternal bloodline. That doesn't change. That Y chromosome that gets passed down generation to generation doesn't change. All right, that's just learning something on your way to learning something. But in history, the Canaanite, like the Hebrew language, for all intents and purposes, was a Canaanite language. You can look this up. They're in the same language. They're in the same language family. The Israelites had Canaanite ways. They worshiped Canaanite gods. They married Canaanite women, and they lived amongst the Canaanites, and they never fully conquered them. And we're going to get Bible precepts for this later in the lesson. But I've done a lot of lessons on this too, so if you've been following me, this should be clear to you. But that is why, if in the Yoruba's case, if you're not practicing worshiping Yahweh or worshiping the true God, you're not practicing the Torah, you weren't practicing the Old Testament, and and now you've left Israel and you're living in Arabia and you're practicing idolatry, what are they going to call you? What are they going to think you are? They're going to think you're Canaanites, because you're practicing their their religion, and you're speaking, like, because at that time they probably would have been speaking Aramaic or something, which was the same language even the Canaanites were speaking at that time. I'm giving you a lot of information, but just look that up on your own time. That's why it's a key term. The relation between the Canaanites and the Israelites when it comes to language, culture, everything. So that's why they would have been called, are thought to be Canaanites, when in reality they're Israelites. Next, the next key term, Jokatan, and hopefully we can get through these on this, running out of time. Jokatan, we're gonna pause. Okay, I gotta try to hurry up and move to these key terms, because this is, like I said, this is I don't want this to turn into a super long lesson. Jokatan are in the Quran. Katan are according to the Arabic tradition. Katan according to the Bible, was a son of Shem, and he produced a branch. He was a descendant of Shem. he was the son of Eber, where you get the Hebrews from. And Eber had two sons, Peleg and Joktan. Peleg went on to produce the other Hebrews that came through Abraham. The Moabites, the Ammonites, the Midianites, the Edomites, the Israelites, so forth. The Joktan founded a branch of Arabs, well, the first branch of Arabs. That's why they're called like true Arabs. And then the Ishmaelite Arabs are the second branch of Arabs. Okay, I've talked about that a lot on here before. You can go look that up. So that's according to the to both the Quran and the Bible. But according to the Quran and Islamic tradition, and the reason why we got to cover this is because this explains to you why the Fulani were saying the stuff that they in their written records, why the Fulanis say what they say, because the Fulanis are an Islamic people. So they're viewing things from an Islamic perspective when it comes to the Yoruba and their origins. And so it doesn't mean that what they're saying, what their records are, is false. Their records are actually spot on 90%. The oral tradition that the Yorubas have passed down is also spot on, maybe like 75%. And that's what we're doing here. We're reconciling them. But according to the Islamic tradition, one of Jokatan's sons or descendants was named Yarub. Okay, and when we read going forward with one of the sources, the Fulani source from the Sokoto Caliphate or the Sokoto Empire, Muhammad Bello, he said that that's the reason why they call them Yoruba. They call them Yoruba because they got kicked out of Yorub's empire. Okay, well, let's put that into a time perspective. That was way back in Old Testament times. Because the Bible doesn't name any of Jokatan's sons like that, like there's no Yarub, but I'm not going to say that it's not his son because that wasn't relevant to the Bible writers. But for the Quran and for Arabs, that's a part of their history that's relevant to them, and they keep records. I trust people's historical records. 90% of the time, that's what we have records for. Anyways, Yarub is the one who founded the kingdom in southern Arabia and supplanted the Ethiopians that were living there. And so he's the founder of their kingdom and dynasty, even down up until when Islamic times, when you have the rise of Islam. That's who their founder and king was. So the empire was the Himyar Empire, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Those kings descended from Yarub. Okay, so just remember that going forward. All right. That's why I said we had a lot of key terms. Next, Sheba, Seba, and Dedan. Cush had a son named Seba, and I'm going to link one of the lessons I'm linking to the end of this lesson deals with this intensively. Hold on a second. Sorry. Told you, allergies. Cush had a son named Seba and grandsons from Rama named Sheba and Dedan. This Seba is where Eritreans descend from, and Sheba is where Ethiopians come from. And caveat, when I say Ethiopians, we're talking about like what you think of when you think of an Ethiopian. There's an ethnic group there. They're the ones who pretty much dominated the country most of the time. They're the ones who founded Axum. They're the ones where the Queen of Sheba's line come. That whole story and all of that. That's the people we're talking about. Because Ethiopia has many different ethnic groups living there. It seems like they're getting along now, and they got a new leader, and he seems to be pushing that. And Ethiopians I've met seem to not lately. They don't seem to be on any tribalism stuff, which I think is good. Keep up the good work. All right, this Seba is where Eritreans descend from, and Sheba is where Ethiopians come from. And I have in parentheses Sheba, Axum, and Ethiopia. These two groups ruled over the southern Arabian Peninsula. Also, other Cushitic groups, and I have in parentheses Dedan, because Dedan was there too, were native to the area as well. See Genesis 10:7. Joktan had a son named Sheba. This Sheba is the father of Yarub. And this is if this happened and we're trying to line it up with the Bible, okay? if we were doing that. I have to throw that caveat in there. That's all that is. We don't, the Quran, that doesn't say that, and we don't, and Jokatan's sons are not named in the Bible. This Sheba is the father of Urub and supplanted the Cushitic Sheba/Seba in southern Arabia. See Genesis 10:26 through 28. To confuse things even further, Abraham had two grandsons named Sheba and Dedan, who also settled in the Arabian Peninsula area. See Genesis 25:1 through 4. All right, so this is just showing you how complicated things can be. The point of that is, when you're reading the Bible, you got to know when it's talking about Sheba, which Sheba is it talking about? When it's talking about the Sabians, which ones are they talking about? Because these are all, I just named you all the groups that had the same name, and they all settled and lived in the same area and around each other, okay? So sometimes that makes things complicated. The term Sabians in the Bible can be referring to any of these groups, more so just two specifically. But it can at times, because of things that were going on in history, refer to all four. From the time Jokatan's grandson Urub established the Himyarite Arabic kingdom Saba in Yemen circa 2000 BC to the rise of Islam circa 650 AD, power switched back and forth between them and the Ethiopians. And we talked about that. The Sheba on the Ethiopian side, the Eastern African side, routinely went over there and conquered Saba and the Hamyar kingdom over and over and over. You even got stories about it in the Quran. Okay, another term that you need to know is Himyarite. Okay, that's the kingdom in Yemen that the Yoruba is left out of. Okay, and this is going to be, and the reason why we're saying we know this for sure is the Fulani tradition says they got kicked out by Yarub, and Yarub, that's the Himyar kingdom. That's who they descend from. That's who they claim to be their patriarch king. Okay. Then from the Yoruba's oral tradition that's passed down, they say they were kicked out of Arabia as well, but they say they were kicked out for idolatry and idol worship by Muhammadans or Muslims. And we're going to read this from the sources. Now, you have to understand the reason why we've come, this is what we're establishing here is conclusive without a doubt. We know that it didn't happen after the rise of Islam, because they, according to the Yoruba tradition, they say they were in Mecca, and the Muslims keep meticulous records, and there's no records of this. So this didn't happen. I mean, it happened, but not during that time. Let me rephrase that. It didn't happen after the rise of Islam. What happened, and this is why you have to keep written records. Since the Yorubas did not keep written records, as time went on and Islam started to spread into West Africa, the Yoruba put their origin stories into an Islamic context. Okay? Because right before the rise of Islam on the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in southern Arabia, and we're going to cover this as the lesson goes forward, monotheism had already begun to spread amongst Arabs. Okay, it was called Rahmanism, and you had this empire, that the Himyarite Empire. This is why it's one of the key terms. They converted to Judaism around 380 AD. Okay, and so they were a kingdom that was practicing Judaism between 380 AD up until 525 AD, with some breaks in there because of the Ethiopian Christian Empire or Axum coming over there and, taking them over for a little while sometimes. But like I said, we're going to get into all of this because it all relates to the Yoruba. So, but during that time, this is pre-Muslim times. So, and I just gave you the time period. They did not keep as many extensive written records back then, the Himyarite Empire, okay, or the Himyarite Kingdom. But we know it was monotheistic, okay? Next. So we have to reconcile it. That's how we're reconciling these two origin stories. So we know then that if the Yoruba tradition says that they were kicked out for idol worship by Mohammedans, which just means people who wanted to worship one God, but we know there's no records for it, and there should be if it happened in Islamic times. But right before Islamic times, you had another movement converting over to worshiping one God, where they converted to practicing Judaism. Uh, it would fall in that time period then. And you're reconciling it with the Fulani written tradition, which says you were kicked out by Yarub, which is where the Himyarite kings descend from. Okay? All right, like I always like to say, just learning something on your way to learning something. Next, Du Nuas, and I'm probably butchering that, but I've never heard it before. This is just all from reading. Are Yusuf Asar, and the reason why the Du Nuwas is just because when he converted to Judaism, he was an Arab, he was a descendant of Yarub, he was a Himyarite, and he was a descendant of the kings, but he wasn't in line to become king, so he usurped the throne. But the point is the Du Nuwas is because when he converted to Judaism, he started wearing little side forelocks. Okay. And he changed his name to Yusuf, which is Joseph. But his given name was Asar. Asar, as we go forward reading in the Yoruba oral tradition that's been passed down, this Asar is the same as Asara from the Yoruba origin story. They're the same person. Because as you see their history background, like the background on this dude, you'll see why like you can link them to that person. I don't know, like I said, all of this stuff would have been easily cleared up if people kept written records. Like our people, we need to keep written records of stuff. Even today, if it's in another language, you see the Fulani, they keep records in Arabic. We need to keep records of our stuff, even if it's in another language. Extensive records, so we don't have confusion. Uh, anyways, next, Abraha. And Abraha is the same person as Brahma from the Yoruba origin story. And even with that, you can tell from that tradition being passed down, instead of being written down, other stuff got mixed up in there. Because like even with Brahma, you got the Abraham, a lot of stuff from the Islamic tradition, and even the Talmud that deals with Abraham is mixed in with the Brahma person in the Yoruba oral tradition. The fact that, he didn't want to sell his father's idols and all of that stuff. It's mixing in stuff about traditions held about Abraham. Also, same thing though. So that's why they got. But from Abraham, you get Brahma because another thing. So like the year of the elephant is when in Muslim tradition is when they believe that Mecca was attacked by this dude Abraham, right? Who's Brahma. A part of the Yoruba oral tradition story says that Aduduwa was in Mecca and that the dude and a war broke out between Brahma and his followers and Aduduwa and his followers. That's the Yoruba's collective memory of the year of the elephant with this dude Abraham, who's the same thing as Brahma. All right. All right, like I said, I really hope some Yoruba scholars will take this information and run with it, do some more research on it, and come up with papers and postulate this, postulate this information in an academic format. All right. Okay, here's the source we're going to be reading from next and a little bit later on in the lesson. You can copy it down if you need to. Okay, this is from chapter 1, page 1. Origin. There have been many theories about the origins of the Yoruba people. Alamude Lucas attempted to prove using linguistic evidence that the Yorubas originated from Egypt. That is partially true because the Israelites came out of Egypt. We got to stop faking the funk here with this stuff, and deal with reality. Deal with reality. So even that is true because the Israelites weren't even a nation when they went into Egypt. The Israelites didn't become a nation until they came out of Egypt after being in Egypt for 400 years. So that's factual. You're going to have a lot of Egyptian influence and Egyptian culture that is similar to Israelite culture. Dr. Biel Baku saw the ancient kingdoms of Meroe in the eastern Sudan as the source of the Yorubas. That is also true because I just discussed that they lived in near Moreau for a while, and I covered that in that lesson I did about the Akan, Yoruba, and the Igbo. And in that lesson, I kind of deal with this a little bit, but I spent a lot of time mainly in the beginning dealing with the Akan. So I only, when I got to the Yoruba section, it was shorter. This is a more long and detailed version of that. Excuse me. But I'm still going to link that lesson to the end of this one. And in there, you can find where I cover, like with the Akan and the Igbo and stuff being in Moreau or Kush. I cover that in the history and I bring sources and all of that. Okay, so this is partially, this is true as well. There's nothing to argue with here. It's just a matter of time of when they got there and where they were at before there. That the two important waves of migration into IF about the 7th and 10th centuries AD. The 10th century one, I don't know because I didn't look into this guy's research. It could be. But the 7th century one, that's spot on. That's what we're basically saying here. And that's what we're saying. That's what I covered in that lesson with the Akan, Yoruba, and Igbo. I said the same thing, presenting sources. Okay, because the time we're dealing with right now, with them coming out of the Himyarite Empire. Remember, I split the baby, and we went with 550, circa 550 A.D. The 7th century would be the 600s A.D. So we're around about the same time, and we don't know how long the for all intents and purposes, the migration was probably gradual, but that's so yeah, we're looking at around the 600s. That would fit. Anyways, though, let's keep going. About the 7th and 10th centuries AD, respectively, formed the nucleus of the town If, as well as of the Yoruba nation. Migration legends and the creation myth. The migration legends are in the opposite direction. These say that the Yorubas originated from the remnants of the children of Canaan, who were the tribe of Nimrod, but were driven out of Arabia by a prince, Yoruba, and migrated to their present territory, leaving some of their people behind wherever they stopped on the way. Okay, so and we covered why it was said Nimrod, a tribe of Nimrod from Canaan. That's why we went over that in the key terms. It's just saying they were Canaanites. Also, we covered why they would say they were Canaanites in the beginning of this, because the Yoruba were practicing idolatry. We know they were Israelites, but their culture, they were practicing Canaanite religion, which a lot of them still do today. And, they got labeled as such. Because like we've covered, if you study ancient history, there's very little to differentiate Israelites from Canaanites. When you look at the historical record, when you start looking at languages, where the people lived, where you go, and if you read your Bible and you actually pay attention to the history you're reading, and we're going to have some of them sources in this lesson, the Bible even tells you that the Canaanites and the Israelites were all mixed up together. All right. Another legend, and we covered Yarub and who that was, that and all of that. That's why we brought that up in the key terms. Another legend, which Dr. Johnson says he recorded from the traditional histories of Oyo, and Dr. Johnson, he was a Yoruba himself, okay, says that Aduduwa, a son, and we're going to read his source directly. We're going to read the sources for both of these directly. Says that Aduduwa, a son of King Lamarudu of Mecca, reverted to idolatry and was expelled by the faithful Muslims. After wandering eastward for 90 days, he, Aduduwa, finally settled at If. The origin myth is widely known and has been recorded in different variations. It was referred to briefly by Richard and John Lander on May 15, 1830, and was published in fuller version by Aji Crother 13 years later. And if you want the sources that this guy used, they're right there at the bottom for you. All right, here's the next source. Same MO. I'm going to leave it up for a second. You can jot it down if you need to. Okay. So this is from his account. The only written record we have on this subject is that of the Sultan Bello of Sokoto, the founder of that city, the most learned, if not the most powerful of the Fulani sovereigns that ever bore rule in the Sudan. Captain Clapperton travels and discoveries in the northern and central Africa 1822 to 1824, made the acquaintance of this monarch. From a large geographical and historical work by him, Captain Clapperton made a copious extract, from which the following is taken. Oh, and that work, we're going to get a source for that later at the end. That work, he tells where a lot of people, where a lot of groups in West Africa come from. And ding, 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 big surprise. Like most of them, they said their migration origins start in the Middle East. And we're going to get the source for that is like Arabia, Israel, Palestine, Persia. Yeah. Anyways, just more learning something on your way to learning something. Where are we at here? And like I've said before, the whole Hamitic hypothesis thing, like if you read the Bible, you know that the Hamites were black. They weren't white. They're not Caucasians. They weren't dark-skinned Caucasians. You have to know the background behind these things. So the reason why they're saying that is somehow with evolution, with the theory of evolution. Look into the background of evolution and how it got started, and it was extremely racist. Even look at the full title. Google the full title of Charles Darwin's book, not the short title, but the full title. The theory of evolution is racist. So you basically what they were trying to say with that is that we somehow are not a people. Those who are Negroes, like we don't, we're a separate group. Um, we know that to be nonsense. So the Bible tells you that the Hamites were black, all right? And so nobody originated, just sprung up from the ground where they were. It's common knowledge that there had to have been one human being, and then that human being had to have families and children, and then and so forth, and we populate the earth, and they migrate to areas, okay? Um, the oral traditions for a lot of West Africans and a lot of Bantus in Central Africa, which Bantu, Niger, Congo groups say that they came from the Middle East. That's what they're saying, and they're calling it, or they say they come from the Middle East, or like Egypt and Kush. That's where they migrated from. All right, there's nothing. These are just the facts. You have to deal with them. It doesn't mean anything. Like in the whole Hamite thing, like I said, the Hamites are black anyway. So, all right. Where are we at here? Yoruba is an extensive province containing rivers, forests, sands, and mountains, as also a great many wonderful and extraordinary things. In it, the talking green bird called Babaga parrot is found. The inhabitants of this province, Yoruba, it is supposed, originated from the remnant of the children of Canaan, who were of the tribe of Nimrod. Notice there it said remnant. The cause of their establishment in the west of Africa was, as it is stated, in consequence of their being driven by Yaruba, son of Catan. Remember, we covered that in the key terms. That's who established the original Himyarite Empire at Saba, and that's who the Himyarite kings claim descent from. And he's their founder of their branch of Arabs that live in southern Arabia. Out of Arabia to the western coast between Egypt and Abyssinia. That's where we talked about that large staging ground where you had a lot of Israelites living at the time. This also confirms the research that the people said about, that they might have been in Meroe or Cush. This is being confirmed, right? Because that's where they just went, okay? And as we're going to read from the Yoruba oral tradition, the oral tradition is going to say that they came from out of Arabia as well, all right? So we're just making all of this stuff, crystal, crystal, crystal clear. From that spot, they advanced into the interior of Africa till they reached Yarba, where they fixed their residence. On their way, they left in every place they stopped at a tribe of their own people. Thus, it is supposed that all the tribes of the Sudan, and I stopped there. And why they're saying they left their own people, because this was a large Israelite migration. Other groups were coming with them, and along the way, there was people who stopped. That's why we have Bantus and Niger, Congo people all throughout the continent of Africa. Oh, all right, moving on. All right, still from the same source. At what period of time Lamarudu reigned is unknown, but from the accounts given of the revolution among his descendants and their dispersion, it appears to have been a considerable time after Muhammad. Now, like I said, we covered this already, that it wasn't during that time. The Yoruba just put an Islamic context on this because, like I said, they didn't keep written records. It didn't happen, and it couldn't have happened in that time because if it did, there would be a record, and there's no record. So we know what time it would have came in dealing with monotheists. It would have been during the Himyarite Empire between 380 when they converted to Judaism between 380 AD and 525 AD. Okay. The crown prince Adu. Wait, we give the accounts as they are related. The crown prince Aduduwa relapsed into idolatry during his father's reign, and he was possessed of great influence. He drew many after him. His purpose was to transform the state religion into paganism, and hence he converted the great mosque of the city into an idol temple, and this Asara, his priest, who was himself an image maker studded with idols. Asara had a son called Brahma, who was brought up a Mohammedan. During his minority, and remember, in reality, these actual historical figures, Asara is Asar, and Brahma is Abraham, and Abraham, as we're going to find out later, was a Christian from the actual records on this person. During his minority, he was a seller of his father's idols, an occupation which he thoroughly abhorred, but which he was obliged to engage in. But in offering for sale his father's handiwork, he usually invited buyers, calling out, "Who would purchase falsehood? A premonition, a premonition this of what the boy will afterwards become." And that's what I was saying earlier. You see remnants of like Islamic tradition with Abraham and Talmudic traditions with Abraham in here, because that's a tradition that people have held for thousands of years, that Abraham that his father was an idolater and that he had to sell idols for him, and some even say he went to war with Nimrod. I go with what I can read in the Bible, but I'm just telling you, this reeks of that, and that's why the dude's name is Brahma, like Abraham. But in reality, it's really just the historical figure Abraham, that we're going to get more information on. All right. By the influence of the crown prince, a royal mandate was issued ordering all the men to go out hunting for 3 days before the annual celebration of the festivals held in honor of these gods. When Brahma was old enough, he seized the opportunity of one such absences from the town of those who might have opposed him to destroy the gods, whose presence had caused the sacred mosque to become desecrated. Um, Now you got to also notice here too, with Brahma being Abraham. Abraham seized the throne, and you see here it's like while they were gone, he saw his opportunity to do a revolt. That's just the Yoruba's collective memory of that incident involving Abraham. And then same thing with them being in Mecca, it's just their collective memory of the year of the elephant. Um, Anyways, and when they would have been forced to stop doing idolatry is when Asar, who they call Asara, the Dunuas guy that we covered in the beginning in the key terms, when he came to power, he would have forced them to stop practicing idolatry. Okay. Anyways, we'll go deeper into this. Um, the axe with which the idols were hewed in pieces was left hanging in the neck of the chief idol, a huge thing in human shape. Inquiry being made, it was soon discovered who the iconoclast was, and when accosted, he gave replies which were not unlike those which Joash gave to the AFRO-Israelites who had accused his son Gideon of having performed a similar act in Judges 6, verses 28 through 33. Said Brahma, ask that huge idol who did it. The men replied, can he speak? Then said Brahma, why do you worship things which cannot speak? He was immediately ordered to be burnt alive for this act of gross impropriety. 1,000 loads of wood were collected for a stake, and several pots of oil were brought for the purpose of firing the pile. This was signal for a civil war. Each of the two parties had powerful followers, but the Mohammedan party, which was hitherto suppressed, had the upper hand and vanquished their opponents. Lamaradu, the king, was slain, and all his children, with those who sympathized with them, were expelled from the town. The princes who became kings of Gogobri and Kukawa went westward, and Oduduwa eastwards. The latter traveled 90 days from Mecca, and after wandering about, finally settled down at If, where he met with Nigran, or Setulu, the founder of the Ifa worship. Oduduwa and his children had escaped with two idols to If. Sahibu being sent Sahabu being sent with an army to destroy or reduce them to submission was defeated, and amongst the booty secured by the victors was a copy of the Quran. This was afterwards pre-saved in a temple and was not only venerated by succeeding generations as a sacred relic, but is even worshipped to this day under the name of me, signifying something tied up. And sorry for any typos in here. That's how it came over when I copied it from the PDF. All right. But you're going to see, now we're going to find out all this stuff that they're talking about. This is just their collective memory about incidences that happened that caused them to have to leave the southern Arabian Peninsula area. And since they didn't write it down, it ended up getting mixed in. A lot of other things ended up getting mixed into the tradition. Okay? But now let's go forward. All right, here's the next source. Yeah. I'll be giving y'all good sources, man. Gotta respect my source game. My source game is mean, son. As a typical example, one can cite the historical work of the noted scholar and political leader Muhammad Bello of Sokoto in Hassaland. His Infaq al-Masur, written in 1812, attributes Middle Eastern origins from Egypt, Palestine, and Palestine just means Israel, the Yemen, and even Persia to a number of West African peoples. All right. Anyways, though for the most part without reference specifically to Ham or Noah. And some of the, you're wondering like, well, Persia, what is it like far in between there? There were Assyrians that came. You feel me? Like, or instead of saying you feel me, I'll say Fuhamu. You understand me? Like, there were Assyrians who migrated into Central Africa and Western Africa as well, and we covered how Nimrod founded them. The Bible tells you that. So they were founded by Cushites. They were founded by Ethiopians. When the Persians took over the Chaldean Babylonian Empire, when the Medo-Persians took that over, the Israelites were in slavery amongst the Persians as well. And there were other groups who had been taken over and taken captive in things that were brought over and under Persian control at the time. So if they migrated out of Persia or they migrated, they were one of those groups that were brought over, either Israelites or some other type of Hebrew group or a Hamitic group. They just migrated into their origins. Then they say they migrated into West Africa from Persia. Like this is not. It doesn't mean that they're Persian or that or like somehow that they're not like they weren't black or anything, and somehow it's no like this. It's your own history. We have to stop this nonsense. Sorry. Anyways, let's read that again. Written in 1812, attributes Middle Eastern origins from Egypt, Palestine, the Yemen, and even Persian to a number of West African peoples, though for the most part without reference specifically to Ham or Noah. In the case of the Yoruba, however, Bello declares them to be descendants of Canaan, and more specifically of his son Nimrud, who is traditionally linked with Babylonia/Iraq. And that's because in the Bible, it tells you he's the one who founded Babylon. He founded Babel. He founded Asher or Syria. He founded Nineveh. He founded Akkad. He founded a lot of those Mesopotamian cities. You can find that in Genesis 10 as well. He combines this conventional piece of speculative genealogy with an equally speculative venture in historical etymology, deriving the name Yoruba from that of Yorub, a Ben Katan. Remember, we've been covering that, and that was in the key terms. That's why I said you should take notes. The legendary ancestor of the Himyarite kings of Yemen in pre-Islamic times, hypothesizing that the ancestral Yoruba have been expelled from their original homeland in Iraq by Yarub. And that's why I said, like, we have to reconcile this with um, the Yoruba oral tradition, which says Arabia and not Iraq. Also, they wouldn't have the Himyarite kingdom never really ruled over, large portions of Iraq. Uh, he's saying this based off of the whole Nimrod thing, which, like I said, we cleared that up in the beginning of the lesson. Here's their sources. In the Islamic tradition, Nimrod is considered a son of Canaan rather than as in the Old Testament of Cush. And then here's the other record that was used. So you see here, we're establishing that the Yoruba left Arabia during the Himyarite kingdom's reign. And we're going to find out that it was during when they switched to monotheism, which was around 380 AD. That's when they converted to monotheism. But it was like on and off because the Ethiopians or Axum would come and conquer them. You had a radical dude rise up around 520 and take the throne and start massacring Christians and idolaters, committing genocide. That would be around the time that the Yoruba left Arabia because he was killing idolaters. That person's name was Yusuf Asar. That's where in the Yoruba tradition you get Asara, okay? And then later, an Ethiopian or someone from Axum is going to take over. And we're going to read the story. And his name was Abraha. And he's the one who sacks Mecca later, okay? And we're going to read about it. And that's where the Yoruba get Brahma from, okay? This is just their collective memory of these incidences. Okay. These are just generic background information before we get into the academic sources dealing with this stuff, just to give you background. So this is just from Wikipedia. And the only reason why I brought these over is because, like I said at the beginning of the lesson, there's a lot of I know a lot of people who follow my history lessons, their background, they might not know a lot about Arab history. So I wanted to give you just some generic background information before, because the academic sources kind of target in on specific things, and you need to have a general picture. So I'm going to give you a general picture first. The Himyarite kingdom, or Himyar, and you see the Arabic stuff in Hebrew there too, flourished around from 110 BCE to the 520s CE or AD. Historically referred to as the Homerite kingdom by the Greeks and the Romans, was a kingdom in ancient Yemen. Established in 110 BCE, it took as its capital the ancient city of Zafar, to be followed at the beginning of the 4th century by what is the modern day city of Sana'a. The kingdom conquered neighboring Sheba in circa 25 BCE for the first time, Qataban in circa 200 CE, and Hadramut in circa 300 CE. Its political fortunes relative to Saba changed frequently until it finally conquered the Sabian kingdom around 280 CE. And see, even right there, we just named Saba, Sheba, different thing. Now we talk about Sabian kingdom. I was telling you in the beginning, it can get real confusing because those are talking about two different things. Anyways, Himyar then endured until it finally fell to invaders from the kingdom of Axum in 525 CE. All right. More general background information still from Wikipedia. The Himyarite kings appear to have abandoned polytheism and converted to Judaism around the year 380. several decades after the conversion of the Ethiopian kingdom of Axum to Christianity, 340 AD. And Axum was just the growth of Sheba. That story, the Queen of Sheba in the Bible, and the Ethiopian kings claimed descent from her. That was Sheba. Axum progressed out of Sheba. Okay. Next, and I've covered that before a lot in here. Uh, Several decades after the conversion of the Ethiopian kingdom of Axum to Christianity, no changes occurred in the people's script, calendar, or language, unlike at Axum after its conversion. This date marks the end of an era in which numerous inscriptions record the names and deeds of kings and dedicated buildings to local, example, Wagal and Simyata and major Almaka gods. From the 380s, temples were abandoned and dedications to the old gods ceased, replaced by references to Ramanan. And this is what I was explaining to you earlier, that when this happened, they don't have detailed written records for when this happened. When Islam comes on the scene, they got meticulous records. So we know it didn't happen during Mohammedan times. The Yoruba just put that lens on it because with not keeping a written record, then when Islam started to spread into West Africa, the Yoruba put an Islamic context. They put their oral tradition into an Islamic context to try to make it make sense because they didn't have a written record. Okay. But now it's 2018 and knowledge and information has increased in the world, and our access to that information has increased and become more easily available. So we can use that now to clear up some things. And so we know for without a shadow of a doubt that it was during this Himyarite time. We've kind of driven that point home with sources leading up to this point. Uh, from the 380s, temples were abandoned and dedications to the old gods ceased, replaced by references to Ramanan, the Lord of Heaven, or Lord of Heaven and Earth. The political context for this conversion may have been Arabia's interest in maintaining neutrality and good trade relations with the competing empires of Byzantium, which first adopted Christianity under Constantine the Great, and the Sassanid Empire, which alternated between Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism. One of the first Jewish kings, Tuba Abu Kariba Assad, is believed to reign 390 to 420 AD, is believed to have converted following a military expedition in northern Arabia. So he wasn't a Israelite, he was a convert. He was a descendant of Yarub, the son of Jokatan. The Byzantine empires had long eyed the Arabian Peninsula and sought to control the lucrative spice trade en route to India. The Byzantines hoped to establish a protectorate by converting the inhabitants to Christianity. Some progress had been made in northern Arabia, but they had little success in Himyar. In your own time, you can go and look into more about like the Pope and the Catholic Church and their involvement with Islam. Like, go look into that. Like, we're just reading about that. They were trying to put Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula for a reason, uh, for political and economic reasons, which is usually why wars and different things are fought, and then they use back in the day religion was used to justify those things. But look into that because that connects to this. But now we're going to get into the academic sources for not get into, go back to academic sources. This was just to give you general context. Okay. Now, like I said, I strongly suggest you take notes. All right, we're going to be using this source for a few slides and a few entries out of here. So let's dive on in. All right, now y'all are going to be glad I gave you that general background information. Himyar, the land of the Himyarites, a state in South Arabia, now Yemen, that included the littoral on the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, with cities such as Narjan and Zafar, an inland territory inhabited by Bedouins. Himyar, those are just Arabs, nomads. Himyar played an important role in the late Roman trade with Axum and India, bringing to the Mediterranean spices, myrrh, silk. And let me point, like, we're talking about Axum. This is a black empire in Africa. Not to mention that you also had empires and people along the eastern African coast in Kenya, going down Tanzania, and even in the more like Uganda as well, also involved in this global trade. The notion that any group of people on the planet Earth were just always uncivilized or have never produced anything is a fallacy. Okay, every race, in which race, I don't even really like to use that term because it's a social construct and it doesn't even go along with the Bible because the Bible deals with bloodlines, but which are your nationalities. But every nationality and bloodline on this planet has produced some form of valuable civilization at some point or another. Okay. Anyways, um, where are we at here? Bringing to the Mediterranean spices, myrrh, silk, etc. For a short time in the 4th century, Himyar was under Aksumite domination, as it was to be again in the 6th century. So the Ethiopians were ruling over them at different times. An attempt in the early 6th century to establish independence under a native ruler, Du Nuwas, was suppressed by the Aksumites, supported by a navy sent by Justin I. The new ruler, so remember we covered who Du Nuwas was in the beginning, and we're going to get more on him going forward, but Du Nuwas was also Yusuf Asar. That's who the Yoruba in their oral tradition refer to as Asara, or where they got that from, and putting it into an Islamic context when, it's really just their collective memory of these incidences. Okay? Du Nuwas was suppressed by the Axumites, supported by a navy sent by Justin I. The new ruler Abraha, however, while continuing tribute payments to Axum, conducted an independent policy. So, and just point this out here: the Byzantine Empire is helping the Axumite Ethiopian Empire conduct military expeditions in Arabia. All right, this is black history, quote unquote. This is African history, quote unquote. Like we have a rich history. That is why I don't like, even with the Black Panther movie, I didn't see it. Whatever people wanted to see it. There's better stuff we can do instead of coming out with comic books and stuff or movies based off of that and other nonsense. Why not make actual movies based off of our ancient history, off of real stories, or even these origin stories that have been passed down? And like we could do a real story on that. Like, anyways, and make a movie out of that. Just more things. I feel like that would just be more productive for us. But that's, sorry for my rant. That was my one soapbox moment in this lesson. The new ruler Abraha, however, while continuing tribute payments to Axum, conducted an independent policy and managed to consolidate his kingdom and to expand its borders northward. So going up more towards Mecca and the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. This dude, and he was probably black, but we know he came from Axum, and he could have been an Israelite as well, because another record says that he was a slave before being put into the military. But anyways, that's not relevant to this. But just these are all side notes. Justinian I tried to involve Himyar in active warfare against Persia, but the Himyarites avoided direct confrontation with the Persians. Circa 570, some Himyarite chiefs invited the Persians into their country, and King Masarat, the last member of Abraha's dynasty, fell in battle. Himyar was placed under Persian governors with their residence in Sana'a. Christianity penetrated Himyar in the 4th century, according to Philostogorius, although Theodore Lector dates its appearance in the area much later. In the reign of Anastasios I. The country became a battlefield between Christianity and Judaism, which had a strong tradition in Himyar. Christianity, in its monophysite version, triumphed with military support from Axum and Constantinople. Local bishops acknowledged the jurisdiction of Alexandria. When Muhammad sent his first embassy to South Arabia, the embassies did not meet any serious opposition from the local population, and the Himyarites converted to Islam. All right. And then he gives his sources. Okay, and now this is Abraham, Brahma, who's called Brahma in the Yoruba tradition, Aksumite ruler of Himyar in South Arabia from 535 to 58 AD. According to Procopius, Wars 1.20.4, Abraham was a Christian, the slave of a Roman trader in Adulas in Ethiopia, a soldier or officer in the Aksumite army occupying Himyar. That's why I said he could have been an Israelite. He had a revolt against Eos, probably Suma Ya Fa'ashwa, the representative of El Boam in South Arabia. He assumed power but acknowledged vassalage to Axum by paying tribute. Abraham consolidated Himyar and in 547 carried out a successful expedition in Central Arabia. Now, another thing I want to point out, just quick side note, even the Limba people who practice, who still keep the Torah and all of that stuff and know they're Israelites in Zimbabwe, if you look at their background and their migration story, they came from Yemen too. I'm only bringing them out because they're the easiest ones for you to Google and look up without having to go into deeper layers. But there's a lot of there's a lot of sub-Saharan African or like Bantu, Niger, Congo Israelites who have a migration story out of Yemen. It's not far-fetched at all. All right, where were we? Central Arabia. Abraham maintained an alliance with the Roman Empire, and Justinian attempted to use him in military operations against Iran or Persia. Although the emperor sent several embassies to Himyar, he could not persuade Abraham to act. Abraham possibly shifted South Arabia from monotheism to orthodoxy. He built a pilgrimage church, Al-Khalis, from Ecclesia at Sanaa. All right, so that's just background on Abraham. Elise Boam, also called Caleb Ela Asbiha. He was also known as King Caleb. Christian king of Axum from circa 520, saint born circa 500, died circa 540. These are all AD. In alliance with Justin I, El Boam led an expedition to Himyar in 525 AD, defeated the native king Du Nuwas, and Du Nuwas is Yusuf Asar. And remember, just Du Nuwas was because when he converted to Judaism, he grew the forelocks out, and that's what it means, like forelocks. And then he took the name Yusuf, which is Arabic for Joseph. His given name was Asar. This is who the Yoruba remember in their oral tradition as Asara, okay? And like I said, they tried to put it into an Islamic context, but this is what actually happened in history, okay? And so when the Axumites came over, and you're going to find out that Abraham, who's also Brahma, um, in the Yoruba tradition, he's the one who kills Yusuf Asar in battle. And then later on, as we just read in the previous slide, he ends up becoming leader. Okay, these are all things that the Yoruba remember from their migration story, and it's just something from their collective memory. And because they didn't write down what happened, they've added things, and it's become more confusing. But these are the actual historical events that were going on. The Yoruba would have left Arabia at this time, during this time period, somewhere in between there, because remember, Aduduwa decided to worship idols, and they cleared out all the idol worshippers. That's what Du Nuwas did when he took over power. of the Himyarite kingdom. Okay, just putting this all into perspective for you. And set in his place Sumyafa Ashwa, who was eventually overthrown by Abraham. The latter nevertheless remained Elsboam's vassal. Elsboam's victory inscription was discovered in Marib. Elsabam did not succeed in transforming South Arabia into a fully integrated part of Axum. Malalas describes the luxury of his costume and of his chariot pulled by 4 elephants. Elsabam was a monophysite, and the Axumite church acknowledged the jurisdiction of the monophysite patriarch of Alexandria. In Christian tradition, he appears as a builder of churches and destroyer of idols in South Arabia. Okay, and you see at this time as well, like in that tradition, he destroyed idols and was a builder of churches. So this would have been a time when the Yoruba wanting to practice idol worship was not a good look for them. You feel me? And so they would have came out, went to Axum. It wasn't favorable. Went into that area between Axum and Meroe, where a lot of Israelites were, and from there they migrated into West Africa. The oral tradition lines up with this. The written record that the Fulani has lines up with this. Archaeology and history will line up with this as well. That's what we're showing. That's what we're showing you here in this lesson. Du Nuwas, or Yusef Asar, ruler of Himyar, 517 AD to 525 AD. And now you're seeing too why I said um, circa 550, because I just split the baby from the year of the elephant, where when they tried to sack Mecca, and which the Yoruba also have in their collective memory, because that's why they were talking about Aduduwa being in Mecca and his father being Lamarudu, one of the rulers there. Anyways, so that's why we split the baby and went with 550 AD. And you can see that with the time periods we've been dealing with throughout this lesson. A native of South Arabia, he seized power by overthrowing his predecessor, probably Mad-e-Karib. He converted to Judaism, took the name of Joseph or Yusef, and seeking alliance with Iran, turned against Greek and Ethiopian Christian merchants active in Himyar. Malalias relates that Dimnos, the king of the Himyarites, murdered Roman merchants and stopped their trade with Ethiopia and India. The Axumite expedition, probably led by Elsboam or his father, to Himyar was an immediate response to the policy of Du-Nuwas. At first compelled to flee, Du-Nuwas gathered forces and in 518 reconquered the cities of Zafar, Muhan, and Narjan. Many Christians were killed. According to an inscription, Du-Nuwas' general slaughtered all of the inhabitants of Muwan and burned its church. Du-Nuwas tried to gain the support of Iran and the Lakhmids but failed, whereas the Roman-Ethiopian alliance was strengthened. In 525, with the help of the fleet sent by Justin I, El-Saboam again invaded Himyar. In battle on a seashore, Du-Nuwas was killed by an Ethiopian soldier whom Yo-Kabasias identifies as Abraham. See, Al-Tabari, however, knew a legend that Du-Nuwas preferred suicide to disgrace and threw himself with his horse into the sea. After his death, South Arabia reverted to Axumite rule. Okay, and see what happened here is, so when Du-Nuwas came into power, he started slaughtering Christians and idolaters. And then when the Ethiopians or the Axumites came over, they started slaughtering idolaters. We read that with El Saboam, that we knew like that his rule over Southern Arabia and Axumite rule over Southern Arabia, he was known to have been a destroyer of idols. We just read that. That's why the Yoruba under Aduduwa had to leave Arabia, because they were idolaters. It said that in their oral tradition, they even took idols with them when they left and brought them with them to West Africa. All right. Here's the next source. I'll leave it up for you for a second. All right, and hopefully this will encourage some of the brothers with studying the history. We're studying our history. We're gonna have to get out of just studying African history as well. We got to get into with these migration stories and stuff. Like they make more sense when you have background information on these other places that they're migrating from. Because we've been dealing this whole lesson, we've been pretty much dealing with Yemen and Southern Arabia, but that's where that's where the Yoruba said they came from. We brought that out in the beginning. That's where they say they came from, and that's where the Fulani written record says they came from. So, anyways, Jewish king of Yemen, 515 to 525 AD. According to the Arabian historians, the name Dunuwas was given him on account of his curly hair. Ibn Khaldun, Prolegomena, page 311, Hazma of Ishpahan, Annals 133. Von Kremer connects the name with a fortress, Nuwash, in southern Arabia. Sud Arab Sage, page 90. But the Arabic derivation is substantiated by the name Masruk, given him in the Syriac translation of John Saltes. In Greek sources, he is known as, and it has it there in Greek, and I don't know Greek. So while the name found in John of Ephesus has been explained by von Guschmidt as the Greek, in Ethiopic accounts, he is called Phineas. If the contradictory and sometimes legendary accounts of the personality of Dunuwas given by the Arabian writers can be trusted, he was not a Jew by birth, but embraced Judaism after ascending the throne, taking the name of Joseph, having killed the debauched usurper Kania Yanu du Shanatir, who endeavored to maltreat him. Dunuwas successfully propagated Judaism in Yemen. His zeal for Judaism brought about his fall. Having heard of the persecution of the Jews by the Byzantine emperors, he retaliated by putting to death some Byzantine merchants who were traveling on business through Himyara. This destroyed the trade of Yemen with Europe and involved Dunuwas in a war with the heathen king Adud, whose commercial interests were injured. Thereby, Dunuwas was defeated, but succeeded in reestablishing his kingdom. And you see there, he went to war with a heathen king. Okay? Anyways, and remember, this is Yusuf Asar is the same as Asara in the Yoruba tradition. We've been covering that. And Abraha is their collective memory. Brahma is their collective memory of Abraha in all of these incidences of when they ended up having to get leave. Okay? Anyways, so who knows? Like it could have been Aduduwa could have had a battle with this dude around this time while he's battling the heathen king Adug. We don't know. Okay, but it would have been sometime during Dunuwa's reign or sometime during Abraha's reign when Aduduwa and the Yoruba left Arabia. Where are we at? This destroyed the trade of Yemen with Europe and involved Dunuwas in a war with the heathen king Adug, whose commercial interests were injured thereby. Dunuwas was defeated 521, but succeeded in reestablishing his kingdom. Soon, however, he entangled himself in a new difficulty. He made war against the Christian city Najran in Yemen, which was a dependency of his kingdom. And on his capitulation, in spite, it is said, of his promise of immunity from punishment, he offered the citizens the alternative of embracing Judaism or being put to death. As they refused to renounce their faith, he executed their chief, alternate of embracing Judaism or being put to death. As they refused to renounce their faith, he executed their chief, Harif Aritis Abin Caleb, and 340 chosen men. This event caused a great stir among the Christians, and the Roman Emperor Justin I requested the Negus Al-Taba of El-Saboam of Ethiopia to march against the Jewish king. Accordingly, an Ethiopian army crossed the Red Sea to Yemen. Du Nuwas endeavored unsuccessfully to prevent its landing. The ensuing engagement terminated disastrously for Du Nuwas. His city of Thafar, together with his queen and the treasure, fell into the hands of the enemy. Preferring death to capture, Du Nuwas rode into the sea and was drowned. Or also records say that Abraham killed him. Okay, this is just general background information more on Abraham. This is also taken from Wikipedia. Abraham, also spelled Abriha, died after AD 553, also known as Abraham al-Ashram, was an Axumite army general, then the viceroy of southern Arabia for the kingdom of Axum, and later declared himself an independent king of Himyar. Abraham ruled much of present-day Arabia and Yemen from at least 531 to 547 AD to 555 to 600 to 565 AD. Du Nuwas, the Jewish Himyarite ruler of Yemen, in the period circa 523 AD to 525 AD, or circa 518 to 520 AD, launched military operations against the Axumite Christians and their local Arab Christian allies. The Axumites in Zafar were killed, their fortresses and Yemeni highlands destroyed, and Najran sacked. Najran fell in 518 or 523, and many members of the Himyarite Christian community were put to death, evoking great sympathy throughout the Christian region of the Orient and prompting the intercontinental Axumite military intervention using the massive Axumite fleet aided by a small extra Byzantine fleet first made in 518/523 AD. Abraham was either one of the commanders or a member of one of the armies led by King Caleb of Axum against Du Nuwas. In Al-Tabari's history, Abraham is said to have been the commander of the second army sent by Caleb after the first failed, led by Ariat. Abraham was reported to have led his army of 100,000 men with hundreds of elephants to successfully crush all resistance of the Yemeni army, and then following the suicide of Du Nuwas, seized power and established himself at Sana. He aroused the wrath of Caleb, however, by withholding tribute, who then sent his general Ariat to take over the governorship of Yemen. Abraham rid himself of the latter by a subterfuge, in a duel resulting in Ariat being killed and Abraham suffering the injury, which earned him the sobriquet of Al-Asaram, or Scarface. According to Procopius, Abraham seized the control of Yemen from Isim-i-Theos, or Suma-fa-Ashawa, the Christian Himyarite viceroy appointed by Caleb. With the support of dissident elements within the Axum occupation force who were eager to settle in the Yemen, then a rich and fertile land, Islamic tradition credits Abraham with a military expedition against the Quraysh of Mecca in an invasion of Hajjiz in 570. Known as known as the Year of the Elephant. The Tassafir exegesis of the Surat Al-Fayed states that he perished. All right, and that's the right there. That's where you're getting the whole Mecca thing with Adadua and Lamarudu being there, and Brahma, who is this Abraham dude in the battle, and it being remembered in Mecca. That's the Year of the Elephant, and like I said, the Yoruba oral tradition is putting it into that context. Okay. But somehow later on, now because you don't have written records, when they talked about it, tried to say, oh, it must be after Muhammad or after the rise of Islam, and no, it was during this time. Okay, but um, people, y'all didn't know the history of that like that because you didn't write stuff down. And like I said, now it's 2018. We can get more information and more research and put things together properly. Okay. All right. Now moving forward, this is just to show that the Yoruba fit the Bible signs as far as who the Israelites are, okay? As you know, the ones who have been dispersed via slavery through the four corners of the earth. And this is from a source we used earlier, but I still have it noted down at the bottom. But I gave the full title of the source and in the original slide. This is from pages 9 through 10. Descendants of the Yoruba slaves, some of whom can still speak the Yoruba language, are found in Sierra Leone, where they are called Aku, in Cuba, where they are known as Lucum-E, and in Brazil, where they are known as Nego. And remember, in that lesson I did, very brief, I think it was like 30 minutes, just dealing with Israelites in the American South, where I have that source where it says, where she says, or he says in the 1940s in South Carolina that the Negroes' music was of a Jewish Christian background and that they would have had extensive contact with Jews. Nego, or the Yoruba tribe of Nego, was named as one of the main contributors of slaves to the United States. During the 4 or more centuries of slave trade, when the territory was known as Slave Coast, untold numbers were carried away annually. But these descendants of the Yorubas who live in Cuba, Brazil, the entire of the Caribbean and North America, still preserve Yoruba traditions. Political structure and art have been destroyed, but mythology and folk tales, music and dance, cooking and religion have been retained with varying degrees and modifications. In several parts of the Caribbean and South America, Yoruba religion has been accommodated to Christianity, with Yoruba deities identified with Catholic saints. In Bahia and Havana especially, Yoruba religion flourishes in an unmistakable form. So this is just to show you that a lot of Yoruba were brought here to the New World as slaves, so that would make them Israelites. And we're going to get some scripture precepts on this before we close out. But that religion thing, that is really just practicing the ancient Canaanite religion. Yeah. Anyways, you got to come out of that. That's all I'm going to say. Like that's part of the reason we were put into slavery. You got to come out of that and turn to the God of the Bible and start keeping the commandments. That's the only way you're going to be successful. All right. But let's look at some precepts dealing with this, showing that the Yoruba fit the signs. Ezekiel 16 and 16 and 3. And say, Thus saith the Lord God unto Jerusalem, Thy birth and thy nativity is of the land of Canaan. Thy father was an Amorite, and thy mother an Hittite. Ezekiel 16:45. Thou art thy mother's daughter, that loatheth her husband and her children, and thou art the sister of thy sisters, which loathe their husbands and their children. Your mother was an Hittite, and your father an Amorite. And so I bring these ones out because remember the Fulani tradition written record that they have dealing with the Yoruba says that they were Canaanites. I'm just showing you a brief scripture. You can read all throughout the Old Testament about their intermingling. But in these verses, Jesus is talking, God is talking directly to his people via the prophet Ezekiel. And he's telling them, man, thy birth and thy nativity is in the land of Canaan, where the Canaanites were. Thy father was an Amorite, and thy mother an Hittite. And these are because the Amorites, and if you go look at Genesis 10, the Amorites and the Hittites were all children of Canaan. So they're Canaanites as well. The Amorites, the reason why he says your father was an Amorite was because you can read in the Genesis that Abraham lived amongst the Amorites in the plain of Mamre. That's where he lived. Okay, and then same thing with Isaac. And when they sent, when Abraham got Isaac a wife, and when Isaac got Jacob a wife, they went to Padan Aram, where Sarah's family was, but it was still Abraham's family because Sarah was Abraham's half sister, and that's where they got their wives from. And at that time, the Hittites were kind of ruling in that area, or dominant. So that's why it's saying your father was an Amorite and your mother was a Hittite. Excuse me. Not to mention even the fact that the Hittites, like even things like the word Judah is technically a Hittite word. The first time you hear it mentioned is Esau's wife Judith, and she was a Hittite. Okay, and then you have Judah, So that means Judah was a hit. Even Judah is a Hittite word. Okay. That's all that this scripture is saying. It is dealing with. The Lord is just being point blank about it. Like, y'all married the Canaanites, you worshiped their gods, you lived in their land for so long, you didn't do what I told you to do, which was they were supposed to pretty much exterminate them. If you read what the Bible, the Torah says, that's what it says. Anyways, and so now here we are. All right. 2 Samuel 21 and verse 2. And the king called the Gibeonites and said unto them, Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. And the children of Israel had sworn unto them, and Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah. And what this was, Saul couldn't slay them because Joshua had made a treaty with them. They tricked them, and so they lived amongst them. And so he couldn't kill them. But it's just showing you here another scripture in the Bible where Amorites are living amongst Israel, amongst the people. Okay. First Kings, just showing, that's just with showing you with the Fulani written tradition, like I said, that we're saying they were Canaanites. Yeah, but they're Israelites because we know they were dispersed as slaves and scattered throughout the whole world. Okay. But we're just showing you how the Fulani record, how it could be. To their understanding, y'all practicing idolatry and you doing everything else like the Canaanites, and that's what the Arab records have on you, so that's what they call them. Anyways, 1 Kings 21, 25 through 27. But there was none like unto Ahab, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. And he did very abominably in following idols, according to all things as did the Amorites, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. So you see here that this king of Israel, the king of the northern kingdom, he started worshiping and following the Amorite gods, and had the people doing that. All right, just showing you like that the Israelites did turn and start following Canaanite gods, and that's why the Yoruba were mislabeled as Canaanites. But that is also why the Yoruba still to this day have a lot of idolatry that goes on amongst them. Ezekiel 34 and 6. My sheep wander through all the mountains and upon every high hill. Yea, my flock was scattered upon all the face of the earth, and none did search or seek after them. And that's just saying there that how the Israelites will be scattered upon the whole face of the earth, and no one is bothering to look for us or to restore us to where we are. We're just scattered. Okay. Joel 3 and verse 2. I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. Jeremiah 30, 7 through 9. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. And that's just saying that he's going to free them, the Israelites, out of their captivities, out of their bondages. And those strangers that we were serving and that they were using us will no longer be able to do that. Okay, but that's a prophecy. That's talking about when Christ returns. But they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. And I've done lessons on here, and it deals with this, but that's with my Bible lessons. That literally is talking about King David. King David, it will come up in the first resurrection, and he will be like a prince ruling over Israel, and Christ will be the head king. Hosea 8 and 8. Israel is swallowed up. Now shall they be among the Gentiles as a vessel where is no pleasure. And the Gentiles are just your Indo-Europeans, and you see we're scattered over here in North America, Europe, and we're a vessel that they don't find pleasure in. They look down on us. They consider our neighborhoods to be the worst. They consider us to be the source of the country's problems. Even if you look at, even in Nigeria, like the stuff I saw happening with the Igbo in the northern parts, where they wanted to try to exterminate them in some parts. The same thing happens in Africa too, with sub-Saharan Africa with us. Um, that's what that's talking about. And then this last one here, and then we're going to go into Deuteronomy 28. This is Daniel saying that the curses of Deuteronomy 28 are now upon the children of Israel. So that's how you know and identify Israel. Those blessings, Israel is not going to come up under those blessings again until Christ returns. The scripture is clear. And Daniel is letting you know here that, oh man, them curses for us not keeping that covenant we made with God back there, back with Moses, now they're coming on us. So Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to look at verse 11. Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him. And if we just read some parts from Deuteronomy 28 before we close out, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and 1. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. And that's if they would have kept the covenant. We skip down to verse 15. And he says, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. That means in the urban area, you're not going to be successful, and in the rural area, you're not going to be successful. So like here, you're not going to be successful in New York, you're not going to be successful in Alabama. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Y'all businesses are not going to be the dominant ones. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind and the flocks of thy sheep. All right, your land, your agricultural produce is not going to be the way it needs to be. The farmers here in America, African American ones, they're always complaining about something not going right to the agricultural department. I'm pretty sure the same thing. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. I want to finish this out, and I want to finish reading a little bit more of Deuteronomy. There's no more slides. I didn't include it because it would be too long to put in a slide, the scriptures. But I'm pretty sure same thing in Africa where the Israelites are. Like, is your country producing food to its full capacity? Is it? No, it's not. Right? That's what this is dealing with. Next, where are we at? Verse 19. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that thou settest thine hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed, and thou perish quickly because of the wickedness of thy doings, whereby thou hast forsaken me. The Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. I mean, they're having another Ebola outbreak right now in Africa. 22. The Lord shall smite thee with consumption, and with a fever, and with an inflammation, and with an extreme burning, and with a sword, and with blasting, and with mildew, and they shall pursue thee until thou perish. And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron. Meaning, same thing, dealing with agriculture. Your crops are not going to be that good. You're going to have drought, famine. That happens routinely. The Lord shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust. From heaven shall it come down upon thee, until thou be destroyed. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And the key thing there is, it didn't say migrate. It said remove. That means to be taken out. And thy carcass shall be meat unto all fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. That's saying, just like in Nigeria, when the Edo wanted to sacrifice you to their gods, like the Yoruba and the Igbo, and just like in Dahomey, when the Fan wanted to sacrifice Yoruba to their gods, like, did anybody care about your carcass or sacrificing you to stop it from happening? No. Just like here in the U.S. South, when they hung us from trees, did anybody come to stop that? No, they just left the carcass up. right? That's what we're reading here. 27, the Lord will smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emorize, and with the scab, and with the itch whereof thou canst be healed. These are all diseases. But for the sake of time, we're going to just hit some one-hitter quitters. Skip to verse 30. Thou shalt betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build. Now, for those of you in Nigeria, I don't know, your experience with this might be not as high, but this could have happened over there with them having slaves over there as well. But your people that got sold over here, this happened routinely. You were after the slaves. Like the slave master would take advantage of your wife, and you couldn't do nothing, or he just sell your wife and give her to somebody else. And then this, thou shalt build an house and thou shalt not dwell therein. My ancestors over here built the houses that the slave masters lived in Mississippi, and before that in South Carolina and in Virginia. They built them. They didn't live in them. They built them, but they didn't get to live in them. All right. And thou shalt not dwell therein. And we know this happened with Yoruba slaves that were brought here. So these are all signs showing you Yorubas are Israelites, according to the Bible. Thou shalt plant the vineyard and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. That's the definition of plantation slavery. Like you're planting crops, but you don't get to use any of it. It's for somebody else. All right. What else we want to get at? Should I get over it? Well, we'll just look at 36 and then the last one, the 68. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. And that's what happened, like with the Yoruba and with the other Israelites over there in West Africa, in Central Africa, and Southern Africa, and Eastern Africa, that were dispersed through the Arab slave trade and through the Atlantic or the European slave trade and brought over here. Some of the rulers that they set over them got captured and taken and brought over here and served gods of wood and stone. Stone like the Kaaba, wood, you got your wooden crosses for your churches, Christmas trees that you're putting inside of your house, things that you didn't do before you got here or before you got taken to the Muslim country. But the last one we want to get that people should all be aware of by now, but is verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, and Egypt means bondage, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, because you don't need to take a ship to go into Egypt. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. So he's letting you know that you're going to be put onto slave ships, you're going to be sold to your enemies, they're going to buy you as slaves, and then no one is going to buy you or redeem you. Which isn't that the case? Because why am I still here? I'm over here in America. No one has tried to redeem me from Africa. The dude who's president of Ghana, big ups, because Ghana does have a lot of Israelites there. That country is probably like majority Israelite, and he's saying it's the year of return. I'm not going because I'm waiting till Christ returns so I can reign with him on earth in Israel. But that's, just me. But I still like the gesture that he did with making 2019 year of return or whatever. But yeah, nobody's tried to redeem us. I've had ancestors that went back to Liberia, and that wasn't because anybody from there, like it wasn't because their Econ ancestors or Igbo ancestors were trying to like redeem them. It was because their slave master and some people here, white Americans at the time, wanted to try to repatriate blacks back to free their slaves and send them back to Africa because they felt like the population was growing too big or whatever. Anyways, no one tried to redeem them. Okay, and that's what that part is talking about. I hope this lesson was insightful. If you want to know some more information about some stuff going on with Yemen, pray for Yemen because there's war going on over there. But also, the Yoruba still got cousins in Yemen. They're called Al-Akadim, and they're black people who descend from slaves in Yemen, but they don't descend from Islamic slaves, like slaves brought over from the Muslim slave trade. They descend from slaves that were there prior to Islam. So the times we were just dealing with with the Yoruba. They make up about 10% of Yemen's population, and they're restricted to menial labor. And their name Al Akadim means servant, because they're a permanent bottom underclass. They don't even let them do certain things in society, and they're oppressed. But they've been there in Yemen, so these are Israelites that were in Yemen at the same time the Yoruba were there, who just never left, who part of groups who never left, like the Yoruba did, or the Limba, and other groups who came from out of that region as well. So, anyways, look them up. It's the Al Akadim, AL. If you want to look it up, AL-AKHDAM, and it means servant. Well, it means servant, but Google that with Yemen, and you should be able to pull up more information on them. All right, shalom.